Today we're going to talk about the hidden deadly danger that most people don't want to talk about. In today's video, Jim Phillips talks about why crisis sanitation is so critical.
Hey, Provident Preppers! We are so excited today because we have Jim Phillips, who is an incredible expert when it comes to emergency preparedness. And today our topic is going to be sanitation. And this is something people just aren't talking about. And Jim isn't afraid to talk about any of it. And this is kind of a long subject. So what we decided to do is we're going to break it into two parts. The first part, we're going to cover basic sanitation, but part two, we're going to get into some of the nitty-gritty with personal sanitation and disposal of human waste and what to do if you have problems with your sewer system. So you're going to want to watch both of them and make sure that you know that there are two. So with all of that said, Jim, we are so excited to have you. We will let you get started.
Well, I'm glad to be here. And when you mentioned I'd like to talk about, I don't have any problem discussing these things because once I got into it, I discovered that both I was kind of embarrassed when I first started presenting to people talking about these ugly things that's nasty, smelly, and we don't have to deal with it in our normal society. Everything works beautifully. And so we don't even really think about it. But when I started looking into what was going on, both in emergencies and disasters around the world, we see that the biggest thing that will kill people in the long run, make them sick, make them miserable, injure them, is things to do with sanitation. Whatever the event is, when it happens, there's going to be people injured, hurt, killed, or what have you, just right off the bat. You can't fix that. But it's the aftermath that is the real problem. And if you study these things that have happened around the world with earthquakes and floods and things like that, even in our own country, the sanitation issues become a big deal as it extends for a long period of time. If things happen and then it gets kind of resolved and help comes real quickly, they don't become a big deal. But it's when it stretches into weeks and months, and some cases I'm looking at things that have gone on for years. And the example I use of that is what occurred back in 10, 12 years ago, Katie, that terrible earthquake. Very devastating, and it damaged so much of the infrastructure of that country. And we look at what happened after that, the first few weeks, I mean, they're just trying to get things going, but the long-term effects were really, really severe. And it took 10 years. It was till 2020 was the first time in 10 years they had no deaths from cholera. Cholera is a sanitation issue. Now, they still have cholera going on down there, but they've got enough handle on it. It's small enough. And quite frankly, some of the weaker people or the people more susceptible to it have already had it, and they've been done with them. So it finally died out as far as people dying from cholera after 10 years. Now, that ought to be a hint as to how serious this can be when you have something really big happen. So that's why I started paying close attention to this and digging into it. You see, to put this kind of in perspective, when we talk about sanitation and we take a look at our life expectancy and our health, and for us in this country in particular, we generally say, well, it's just wonderful since the 20th century and the 21st, and we've had all these antibiotics and the doctors and those kinds of things. And so we give the credit to our improved lifestyle and life expectancy to medications, hospitals, and things, but actually it's about sanitation. If you look at some of the statistics of what went on, in fact, one of them I like to use is you take a look back around 1900, what was happening there, the decline in death rate that occurred right around 1900, and the infant mortality. And it started to take a plummet in 1900 to 1920. It was cut to more than half of what it had been, and then it continued to taper off down into the 1960s and all. It's all about sanitation. Yes, we had improved, doctors, hospitals, and things, and immunization, but it's really about sanitation. And one of the others that really pointed that out is you take a look in what happened in Pittsburgh. Around 1907, they put in a water filtration plant. They were getting their water for the city out of the river. They put in a filtration plant, and the typhoid death rates dropped precipitously right after 1907. and it dropped down to where it was very, very small, where it had been very, very high. That's a sanitation issue. So actually, when you talk about sanitation, there's water and there's the waste and all these things. That's why I kind of link them together. And one of the things that we take a look at back in 1952, when I was in grade school, we had this polio emergency and received the polio vaccine. And that was an emergency because there were 14 cases per 100,000. That's cases, not deaths. Then we stepped back a few years, back to 1900. And in 1900, there were 4,429 babies died per 100,000 from diarrhea, just diarrhea, not other diseases, just diarrhea. And what you have to understand is that diarrhea is 100% preventable through sanitation. So it was ignorance is what was causing this. We didn't understand. We didn't understand the contamination issue, washing hands, keeping things cleaned up and all. And until around 1900 and then 1920s, and then the death rate started to drop precipitously as we started to get that information into the people in general. And if you take a look at what goes on around the world and how vital sanitation is, when you take a look at some of these other poor developing countries and or where there's been disasters occur, and you look at the sanitation pictures from those things, which I look at and you go like, that's terrible, and the death and disease rate runs rampant. But what you have to understand is, depending on what happens, when it happens, how it happens, we could find ourselves in that situation overnight. And we don't have a lot of experience with sanitation problems because we haven't had a major breakdown in all of our system for, decades now, generations. And so it's going to catch people completely off guard. They won't have a clue what to do. They're looking for somebody else to fix the problem when really they can take care of it themselves. So that's why I became so interested in teaching about this and publishing classes on this issue, because sanitation will get you. It'll track you down if you're not careful. And it's your responsibility, not the state, not the feds, not your neighbor. It's about you taking care and about you helping your neighbors. So that's why I really I talk a lot about it, and I get pretty bottom line and blunt about things, what will get you in trouble. And what we're really wanting to do is stop the spread of some of these diseases, cholera, typhoid, dysentery, big killers. More people have died from cholera, typhoid, dysentery than anything else on earth. As far as diseases, war, or what have you, that's killed more people than anything else. And we could launch into that again. So it's your responsibility, my responsibility to take care of the problem.
And you have called sanitation the hidden deadly disaster. And I think you've really laid out a case for why it is that. It's something that we often don't think about because we live in a fairly spoiled society. We don't even think that all we have to do is push the handle, and we never think about where it goes or how it gets there or what happens if it doesn't happen. And so that, I think that's a great introduction to this whole topic of sanitation. So now what do we do? How do we get there?
Well, of course, awareness is the first thing, and you need to realize how serious it is, and most people just don't know. So in the class that I published, which is The Hidden Deadly Disaster, I decided that was the title because it's right in front of us, but we don't see it. We overlook it because we don't have to. We don't need to, so we just ignore the whole thing. You flip the handle on the porcelain throne, you wheel things to the side of the street, you dump them down the garbage disposal, you do all those things, and you go to the store and you replenish your sanitizers and cleaners, and you have all this running water, and so you can keep things washed and cleaned up. What if that comes to an end? I'm not a gloom and doom guy, but I want to be prepared, because if for some reason, because of a financial shutdown, because of natural disasters, man-made disasters, the trucks aren't running again, anything like that, and I can't replenish those things, what do I need to do to be prepared ahead of time? And number one, it's what you know here. That's what's most important, so you don't allow the disease cycle to get started. When I talk about the areas that I teach in, there's one which is first it's about your attitude, and then it's clothing, then it's water, then it's sanitation before food. Food's not an issue. It takes you, weeks to starve to death. But if you start the disease cycle by the second or third day, all the food and water won't do you any good. Once you're sick with cholera, dysentery, diarrhea, typhoid, any of those kinds of things, you can't stop it if there's not the medical services, the clinics that you can go to. If they're shut down too, then it's all up to you And if you're not prepared, you're in trouble, is the bottom line. So you've got to get ahead of the curve on this stuff and be ready to intervene so that it doesn't get started. So that knowledge, that understanding, and I'll say, I don't like to take a fear approach, but you need to be afraid of your ignorance and allowing these things to happen. And you have to start from day one, because right now, if you get a little bit sick or you get a cut and it gets infected, that's a part of this whole sanitation thing. If you have an environment that's heavily contaminated, you get a cut, it gets infected, and you can't go to the clinic, you can't get the antibiotics, then you've got a problem. So you have to be, very, very careful about those things. So when we talk about that, keeping things cleaned up, well, it's about don't let the garbage accumulate. Well, how do you prevent that? Well, you want to be prepared ahead of time. And it's simple in the beginning because you can buy paper plates and paper towels and plastic bags. You can get all those things so that in the beginning, while you're trying to adjust to the new lifestyle when things are broken and not working, you don't have a bunch of things you have to wash and clean. You can just package them up and you can dispose of them properly. Now, the garbage service doesn't work, so you have to think, is this something I'm going to burn? I'm going to bury? Do I hold it for other reasons? Can I recycle, reuse it? So you want to be prepared with those kinds of things. But just having the short term, the paper and disposable things is kind of nice. But if it's going to be a long term thing, you can't own enough of those things at the bottom line. So then you're going to get into washing things. Well, you want to have, the plates and glasses and dishes. But then that says, all right, now I don't have a sink with running water, so I need to maybe still use your sink, but you want to have buckets and pails and things. You're going to have mops, all this kind of stuff. And then some of the cleaners and sanitizers, which, by the way, I prefer to use things that are a little more gentle on the environment and have multiple uses. Ammonia, vinegar do a very good job. The baking soda, things like that are really, really nice to have. And of course, you need something heavy duty, then you can use the chlorines. But you have to understand, for storage, the liquid chlorine bleach doesn't store very long. So now you go to the dry bleach, which is the calcium hypochlorite, which is a dry chlorine that you mix with water. Now that'll store much longer. So now if you need something heavy duty, you've got that. You can also buy some of these other things that are not really harsh on the environment. Some of the more biodegradable soaps and things like that don't have the harsh chemicals in them. And then you've got to think about, well, if I'm going to keep my environment cleaned up, the kitchen counters, the floors with the mops and things like that. Well, there's also your clothing. We joke about the young kids that stand their pants up in the corner in there because they don't hardly wash them. Well, that may be okay when the system's working, but you don't want that kind of a contamination when you're under stress. See, one of the things is you may not be getting good rest. And maybe you don't have a good temperature control in your house, and you're going to be maybe hungry, or the nutrition isn't as good. So you're going to be potentially weaker. If you're properly prepared, you shouldn't be, but I want to be prepared for that. So you want to keep things clean for those reasons, because you're more susceptible to getting sick. So that's what you have to do, is keep things kind of cleaned up. And that means, like, well, I don't have an electric washing machine. So now it's going to be back to, a bucket, washers, pails, or the plunger type thing, the mobile washer or the rapid washer in a bucket. They work very well. And we talk about those as we have time. You can get a James washer that's one that has a handle on it. You pull back and forth, and that'll slosh it around, because it's just getting the soap and the detergent into that clothing and then rinsing it out so it doesn't become a problem. So you'll have to do that. But now that brings up an issue. You've got to have water. Now, if the water still runs, you have to assume in a disaster it's probably contaminated, so it's not safe to use directly, but you can sanitize that water both for consumption and then for washing. But what if you have to carry the water? That means you're going to be using a whole lot less water, so you have to be really frugal with it. And that's why I always recommend that people practice things beforehand. You try this out.
Yeah,
Can I wash my clothing in a bucket with a mobile washer, one of those, or just in a dishpan with a scrub board or something? Can you do that? Well, you want to know that you can and understand, this is how I do it, how I take care of it. And then there's all kinds of things you can use that will make it easier for you to do. One of the things you would really like to have if you're hand washing clothing, whether it be with a plunger or a James washer, is drying the clothing. Well, clothesline. Most of us don't have a clothesline. We have a dryer. So you want to be ahead of the game with having the materials, either put up a clothesline or maybe you put up one now and practice with it. So you know how to use it. That means clothespins. That also means that, you want to have a way of getting those clothes a little drier. And I've done it, you wring it. Boy, that'll wear you out. So having a wringer, that you run the clothing through like grandma had, or one of those where you just roll it through there, press it. Really, they help tremendously so the clothes will dry faster. In the summer, that may not be as important, but in the winter, you want to get as dry as you can because you might be hanging them up in the house to dry them and you don't want them dripping on the floor. So all of this stuff starts to go together. So you ask yourself, what would I have to do? All the little components that go into keeping myself clean, which means, well, I don't have a shower, so now I may be doing the sitz bath, the rag and cloth and wiping yourself down because you want to keep yourself clean because that becomes a problem when you have rashes and things like that. And but try those things now. One of the things people can put in the store that I talk about for the personal hygiene, the cleaning, is that you may want to get some of these, they call them the personal wipes. There are some of them that are designed for bathing, no rinse bathing. Those are nice to have, but you probably can't store enough of them if it's long term. So now you want to be sure that you don't throw them away, by the way. The ones that are well made, these non-woven ones, you can just rinse them out and wash them, and then you reuse them again and again and again. They have multiple uses, but now you want soaps and detergents that aren't irritating. So there's where you need to practice on things because I don't have a lot of water. I can't stand under that shower head for 10 minutes to rinse it off. I want something that rinses quite easily and doesn't leave something behind that irritates my skin. So you practice with those things. And by the way, bar soap spreads disease. We think about, well, you want to have some soaps. Well, bar soap, the way they're made with the fatty acids in them, and we use a bar soap right now, we wash it, lather up really good, then we let it run under the water, we rinse, re-rinse. And the bar soap's job is to break up the fats and oils so you can flush away the microbes. And by the way, I would recommend you not be using the antibacterial soaps all the time. They have a place, and the sanitizers have a place, but the antibacterial ones, we're building the antibiotic resistant bacteria all around us. That's a big problem. Just look that one up. So you don't want to be using it all the time, only when you have a special need, when there's a real sanitation need. So the non-antibacterial bar soaps, the bacteria grow all over it. You can put a smear of it on a slide, some of the soap, add some of the bacteria that are around us a little bit. They just grow all over it. They multiply because they eat the fats. They love them. So what I use, what I have in storage, are the liquid soaps. And I like the ones that are less caustic to the body. Dr. Bronner's is one, but there's several of them that are not as harsh on the body and on the environment. You want to have those because you might not have a whole lot of water that you can just flush yourself endlessly. So here's again why you want to practice, because if you're using a shower soap right now that if you leave a little bit of it on it, you get a rash. Not a good time to get a rash when you don't have a lot of water. So practice, play with it, have fun with it, experiment with it. This is not a chore. This is an experiment. It's a game, and do it with your children and people like that so that you're comfortable and you're not afraid because you have an understanding. I'm ready to deal with them. I hope they don't happen, but if they do, I'm ready to deal with it. I know what to do, how to do it, and I'm not going to run around with my hair on fire. Of course, some of us don't have any hair left, so I can't light it on fire anyway.
Yeah. Hey, real quickly, jumping back, you talked about trash, and so what I gathered out of this is we will need to separate our trash.
Yes.
We can't throw it all in together, or it's all contaminated. So you kind of alluded to this, but we would have, things that maybe we can burn. Maybe there's things that we can reuse, like a milk jug or something. We may need that for hauling water or whatever.
Right.
So I guess that would be a critical component of this, is separating our trash. That would be right from the start. You'd have to figure out, some of it's just got to be buried. obviously.
Right.
Okay.
Well, then do you have the organic things in particular, any of the, I'll say, food that spoils and you don't want to eat it, or what's left over that you're not going to eat, that needs to go into compost. That's one of the things you should be doing right now. Everybody should be composting so that you can build your soil, because you may have to be eating out of your garden and you've got to be putting nutrients back into that soil. So the first thing you do is with all of the organics. In fact, right now, we should, I'll simply say, every time you flip on the garbage disposal, you ought to be charged $2. And so that will encourage you to not do that. So instead of spending the $2 for the convenience, you're going to put it in a little bucket, a little pail, and then once a week or whenever, you're going to take it out and put it in the compost bins, the pile, so you can turn it into, something that the plants can use. The other thing, for some people, it may be appropriate. They might have chickens or rabbits, because those small animals, which are good for food, but they're also really good for keeping things cleaned up. Instead of throwing things away, feed it to rabbit. Now the rabbit is something that you can use because, well, it produces some meat and it has some pelts. Chickens produce the eggs, and of course you also have the meat and the fat you get from the chickens. So this becomes an entire system. And if you look at, I'm a systems thinker, because I look at what does it take for me to live right now comfortably, all the different components. And so you break it down, and there's sanitation things that go into feeding myself or somebody else by the waste that can be used by plants and or animals that then can feed me. So you start looking at all the interlinking between these things. You say, wow, this is easy. One of the things that will become a problem that most people don't think about because you don't see it, and that is pest and vermin control. When we have an environment where we don't have as much human activity and automobiles running around, all these things, and also some of the things that are being done for the mosquito abatement, all the spraying that occurs, which has its own set of problems, but there may be more standing water because it's not being, flushed away, washed away. And then you have more waste that may be scattered around. So now you got flies, mice, rats, roaches, and those kinds of things. So this is one of the other reasons you want to keep yourself and your environment cleaned up, because they're just looking for something to eat. You don't give them anything to eat because it's all protected and put away. They're going to go look for someplace else to live. They don't want to live around you because you're too darn clean. Now, clean doesn't mean that you're sanitizing everything, because that's become a real problem. We keep things so sanitized that it's weakening our body, but you don't want to be feeding them because they're going to multiply and they're going to be really happy to move in with you. So again, keeping them cleaned up is for that. What do you do? Well, mice. You can have traps. Of course, cats are really useful. You can bait the mice, but one of the problems with baiting mice with the typical things you buy, they're poisonous. And when that mouse or rat crawls off and dies someplace, if an animal like your cat eats it, now he's got a problem. So you can use things that are less toxic to them. You can make one yourself that's real simple. Get yourself the cheapest muffin mix you can find. One of the brand, they're the really, well, they're really bad because they got a lot of artificial things in them. They're highly, they have all the odor and everything. So you get the cheapest cake mix or muffin mix that you can find that's sweetened, and then you mix in 50-50 baking soda with that. Now, some of these animals, mice and rats, they don't have the ability to burp. And so when they eat you bait them with the sweet smelling cake mix, but then they eat the baking soda in there, and in the acid in their stomach, it swells, it causes gas. They can't burp as easily. And so now then they swell up, puts pressure on them. They feel bad. They go off someplace, they die. They're not poisonous is the point.
So if my cat or my dog got into that mixture, because they can burp, it's not going to hurt them.
That's right. That's right. It will not. And apparently the mice really like that. I have a friend, he has animals, and he had a real infestation of mice and rats out where his rabbits are. I mean, there was just hundreds of them. And he set that out, and by the next day, they were all gone.
Wow.
It took care of them. And that's what I use in my garage, or I have a cat that's in there part of the time, because I don't want to poison the cat, is what it comes down. Because the cat's going to get some of them, and that's great. But the cat might also decide, well, there's one that's not moving. That's easy. So it eats a dead one. And that stuff is hard on them too. It may, in fact, kill them. So it's better to use something that if they eat the dead animal and or if they get into the bait, it won't hurt them. And it's not dangerous for you to handle. It's baking soda and cake mix. And it doesn't have to be an expensive one. Get the cheap ones is what it comes down to. And it'll make a lot. I put them in little muffin tin liners. I cut them down so they're short, and I put a tablespoon in there and just set them around in the garage. And then you can also see when they've eaten it, they'll have their footprints in it, or you see they've been in it, so you know they're taking it. And it'll let you know you have mice, but also watch for them, and they're likely to be gone. One of the other things that you can use is the diatomaceous earth that you can spread around for insects, for roaches in particular, because this is not poisonous. You want to use the food grade. The one I use is Permagard, and it's like broken glass to the insects that crawl through it, and it punches holes in the membrane around their where they have the flexible joints for their feet, their arms, their legs, their necks. The shell, it doesn't punch holes in that, but that membrane is thin and flexible. And when they get the diatomaceous earth, these little fossil shells in there, it punches holes in them. And so I'll say they bleed to death, but they get dehydrated because the diatomaceous earth is also very, very hydroscopic. It's very hydrophilic. It loves it. It wants to suck water out of them. So they dehydrate. It's not a quick kill. It's not a poisonous kill. It may take them a day or so, but it'll kill them off. And you can leave that laying around on the floor and in the cabinets and places like that because it won't hurt you. You can eat it. Your children can get into it, but it'll take care of those guys for ants, for roaches, anything like that. So there's some really nice things you can do that are not hazardous to you, and you want to be prepared ahead with those different little baits, the soaps, the diatomaceous earth, any of those things, the personal wipes and those things. You have them ahead so that you're going like, what am I going to do now? Well, just go to the basement and get them out.
That's always a good plan. And that's one of the things, is coming up with all these ideas and knowing in advance and planning so that we have the resources that we need to take care of it. One of the things
what's important in the planning is that you play with it so that you'll know that you know. It gives you confidence so you can face the future with hope and with confidence.
We had talked a little bit about paper plates and paper products earlier. And one of the things that we do is I don't ever buy the styrofoam ones. I only buy the real paper ones because then I can either compost them or I can burn them. But the styrofoam is just something I have to find a way to dispose of because it's not safe to burn it can't be used for another purpose. So I know I'm paying a little bit more for those paper plates, but I see them as, even now, we can still use them. We can put them in our compost bin versus just throwing them away. So
yeah. Absolutely. You're absolutely right to do that. Or of course, ultimately you get to where you have things that are non-breakable would be good. You can get stainless steel, but also you can get some, the melamine used to be an old name, but some of these heavy duty plastic or the fired glass that's really strong so that you're not going to break them. And then you're going to end up having to wash them. Just, get over it. The washing machine, the dishwasher doesn't work. So just get on with washing them. And it's what you'll have to do if it's long term. Short term for a few weeks or a month or so, well, you can always store enough of those things. But eventually you have to know you may have to wash them, so be prepared to do that. And don't let it be a problem. Don't let it affect your attitude because you're taking care of your household. And one of the other things that people don't think about when I teach the long classes, to me, it's very important that we're trying to help our neighbors. Part of the reason why I do what I do, it's a stewardship. I want to help my neighbors because if I'm doing everything perfectly, I'm taking care of my environment, I'm keeping it clean, and the bugs and roaches, they don't want to live around me. But if my neighborhood is infected with all of these kinds of things, some of that's going to come back on me. And if my neighbors get sick with cholera, diarrhea, and everything, and if I'm trying to help them, it's dangerous to help them because now some of that gets to me. So it's important that you're trying to educate your neighbors now, people around you, And not talking about the big scary things in here, but what happens if this happened for a week or two and you get people thinking about it, and then they may go like, well, what happens if it goes longer? And they want to be prepared with some supplies, and they want to be thinking about these things. So now they're not all freaked out about it, and they don't panic and come over and beg things off you. So I try to help my neighbors so that they're prepared also as much as I can help them, because when it occurs, we're all in it together. I mean, it's on us all. And the fact that you're well prepared and your neighbors are not, you're not very well prepared until your neighbors are. That's one of my statements is I'm not prepared until my neighbors are. And so I try to help them. I can't make them, but I can certainly try and help them.
And that is a great policy. And I think we're all very community oriented. We're all in that mode of, understanding that we can do everything we can, but if we don't spread the good news and help others, we're still not there. We're still not prepared. Yeah. So we've covered some great things here, and I think we're just kind of wrapping up part one here. Part two is going to be, I think, every bit as much important, maybe more important.
It's going to be a little bit more messy.
It's going to be a little more messy, but are there any last minute thoughts, ideas on this subject before we close out, and then we'll talk some more on the second segment?
Well, there are a lot of these things that you need to learn, and it's like, don't be afraid of it. Embrace it is what you want to do. And by embracing it, then you're preparing yourself and you're preparing your attitude. There's a lot of education that's available. There's other people that are teaching things. And I did my full class, which is now published online. It's called The Hidden Deadly Disaster. It's 4 hours. And that's just the basics, all the things we've talked about here, of course, with much greater depth, with images and pictures and things like that. And the things we'll talk about in the second half are in there too. So 4 hours is available online on my website, where you can get into The Hidden Deadly Disaster. It's in the members library. I have a lot of free stuff that's online in 2 libraries there, and I do classes on Wednesday night, Saturday mornings. These are open to public on Zoom. And then I do have a members area that it costs $5.99 a month. And I publish some of the big, what I call the premier, the very in-depth classes right there. I've got to figure out a way to pay for my hobby of what I'm doing, and how to cover the cost of things, some of the research that I do, as well as things I buy and break and teach about. And so it's $5.99 a month, but you can join, watch, the sanitation class. If you want to quit, that's fine. That little bit helps me. And so I'm encouraging people to do that so I can publish more and more. Also, I have a YouTube channel, and that link's on my website, which is jimsway.com. So, and come to the classes. They're free, just like what you do. I appreciate what you do and all the classes you do, because we can get people started without them having to make a big financial investment. Go look at things that are free. And then it comes down to, I'm going to have to spend some money to buy some things and spend some money on education and books and things like that. And I'm big on having books. You see a bunch of them behind me. And I teach classes about the books you should have, you need to have. I'm just doing a series now on nutrition. That's really important. So anyway, thank you for letting me ramble on for a minute here. I enjoy sharing with people. I've practiced and done a lot of things for decades now, and my neighbors need to know it.
Jim, we appreciate you so very much. So we would like everyone to go visit jimsway.com and see what he has available, both on his YouTube channel and on his website. We personally subscribe to Jim's channel because there is so much fantastic information out there. And now this was part one. We're going to do part two. But for the question of the day, what is your biggest concern when it comes to emergency sanitation? Comment below. And thanks for being part of the solution.